Hello everybody and welcome to a almost New Year's Eve special edition of Radiorama, where I show you how to work on radios and radio-based electronics, the occasional stereo, record player, blah blah blah, stuff that runs on tubes. And today I have a 1952 Hallicrafters Model 5R50 in Robin's Egg Blue. And I really wish that the paint was in better shape, because I hate refinishing original finishes. But not only is the paint in bad shape, it's deteriorated to the point where it's just coming right off. The inside looks like it's had a little bit of a rough time. Looks like someone replaced the speaker with this dealio here. I'm guessing there must have been this clamp here must have had something to do with the original speaker fitting in there. The cord's been cut. I don't know what the working condition is. It doesn't work now for sure. Luckily it's a warm, sunny day and I have lots of paint that's kind of close to this color. It's either going to be one of these two. I am going to remove the innards and take a look underneath to see if it's hopefully not been too badly messed with. It's interesting, I've not really seen... I've seen the Hallicrafters versions of these where it's just a radio, but I haven't seen a clock radio. Weirder still is that the coffee maker outlet is on the front of the set. Now, Hallicrafters, their primary business was actually in selling ham radio and amateur radio equipment. And it was back in the day when that was a kind of a major hobby, at least in the United States. And everyone had a ham shack in their attic or whatever. And you could listen into the night. Unfortunately, that's not as much of a thing anymore, mainly because, well, there's just not as much to listen to on shortwave anymore. So other than peer-to-peer communications, there's not a whole lot going on in shortwave radio as far as listening in. I remember when I was a kid, I used to be able to, just barely turn the knob on my first console radio that had shortwave, and you could pick up a zillion stations. It was really neat. But now, again, sadly, there's not much, and there's also a lot of noise on the airwaves from all the crap that people have in their houses and all the stuff coming in on the wires. So anyway, before I get too carried away with doing anything like painting or cleaning, I am going to take the chassis out. I'm going to see what I'm dealing with here. I want to make sure it's not been hacked, it's not been parted out. I want to see if it's salvageable before I put too much effort into it. You never know what you're going to find in these things, and got to hand it to the previous owner for being creative. They put a used up solder roll as the center upper for the speaker. The replacement speaker is bad. You hear that? That is the sound of the field coil rubbing against itself. Well, not the field coil, the voice coil. I see what they did there. They used electrical tape to cinch it up in place. Again, I'm very proud of that engineering. Good job. It looks like it's been worked on. This is not the original Electrolytic capacitor. We have 3 values. Looks like we've had some rework here. There's some crude-ish looking wiring in here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this out of here. This is the original cord. I'm going to at least bring it up on the Variac and see if it's got life. Make sure there's nothing catastrophically wrong. Even if it hums, which they probably it'll do, because that electrolytic looks quite old. That's a good sign. So let's do some hacking. Okay, I have my death wires hooked up to my isolation transformer, because this is a floating hot chassis set. But still, there is a little bit of a shock hazard there. So I've already got it turned on. I'm going to stand back and see what it does. It's a funny sound, but the electrolytics are shot. They're completely shot. But that's a promising sound, the fact that we've all got tube filament. B plus is obviously flowing, even though poorly. The switch works, the clock is spinning, the movement is quiet. So things are not as bad as they might have seemed. Either way, the clock is ticking on my available warm sunlight, and I'd rather go ahead and prep the case. I'm going to take a little bit of a gamble here and assume that once I replace the electrolytic can that will work. But I want to get this prepped and taken care of in advance. Again, I hate doing this. I'm not going to be able to replicate that decal. And I hate taking these apart. It's held in with these little friction clips. And the way, well, let me put a cloth down before I demonstrate what I want to do here, because I don't want to scratch that clear plastic up if I can help it. The way that you remove these little friction clips is I get a little flathead screwdriver and you pry up on one side. I just flew across the garage. That's why you got to do it with both hands and hold your, well, I found it. Keep your hand over the top of it so it doesn't come flying out. So I'm going to remove that. And I'm going to take it over to the sink and scrub the living crap out of it so you haven't get a lot of that loose paint coming off. Clean all the grime and the grub and all that other stuff off of there. Alright, so this is after scrubbing it down in the sink. I used some wet sandpaper while I was at it and smoothed it down. Since my wife ain't here, I'm going to go make sure and dry it out real good by using our turbo oven here. Dang it, stupid clothes are in the way. Alright. Won't fit in there. Hold on a minute. I gotta move the rack. Alrighty, we'll just leave that in the convection oven for about 10 minutes. Make sure and get it real dried out. And then what I do is I save all my old refrigerator boxes or whatever big packages that come in the mail. And I use that to spray paint my stuff on. I should be working on my truck. My 27-year-old pickup truck, after having a week of rain, there's a leak coming through the firewall somewhere. So I came in here this morning and it was a little damp, so I've been mopping it up. It's not a whole lot. It was a week worth of rain, maybe, I don't know, leaked about a couple cups of water. Still, I've had this truck since I was a kid, so I would rather it not have a floor that rusts out, even though out here in California it's not really we don't really have that problem. But anyway, I got sidetracked. Radio. So I'll set up a place in my yard over here, far away from the truck. It looks like the wind is blowing away from the truck, so I won't get overspray on it, which is lame. And hopefully I won't get it on the rocks, because sometimes I get paint on the rocks, and that's a problem, because it won't. It's not like grass where it just grows out. The rocks stay permanently spray painted, and that's why my yard is turning increasingly more colorful. Alright, so it is all completely dried up. In fact, it was hot when I got it out of the oven, so I had to let it cool down a little bit. What I do is I'll shake up the spray paint for a good minute or two, just to make sure it's all mixed up real good. And I tend to apply my spray paint rather heavily. I'll use probably at least half that can on this little set, because you want a real glossy finish. So anyway, like I said, I've got my cardboard out here, and the wind is blowing that direction, so that should be good. It's nice and warm today. This will be probably got about 4 or 5 hours worth of sunlight left, so let's go ahead and start spraying. All right, so I have painted this guy up. It's looking pretty reasonable. I might come back in a few more minutes, put another final coat. I'll also have to buff it out a little bit when the paint is all dry. All right, well, let me show you why it's so difficult painting when it's cooler weather. I'm used to it when it's hot, and usually I can get the paint to flow really nicely and not run. I'm not sure how this is going to look when it dries, but I've got to run here. And what that means is this time of year it takes 3 or 4 days for finishes to harden enough to where you can sand them down and repaint it without it crinkling on you. If it was the summertime, I could do it tomorrow, but that's not going to happen. From experience, I've learned spray paint needs quite a bit of UV to harden up. So there's that. Let bygones be bygones. I've done it many times before, and I always forget when it's been a long time since I've spray painted anything. So now let's go back to the chassis. I've already cut it out of here, but this one canister here has 3 different electrolytics stuffed inside. Red, blue, yellow, and their values are 80, 40, and 20 microfarads. The black is the common negative for all 3. It's rated at 150 volts, which makes sense. We have 120 coming in, and so padding it a few extra volts doesn't hurt. Excuse me. So what I'm going to do is install 3 new electrolytic capacitors, and this is the black common ground. It's kind of hard to get at this. So what I'm going to do is I traced where that same common ground goes. It goes here. So this is a good mounting point for some of my negatives on these caps. Like maybe this guy, this red lead is for the 100 microfarad or the 80 microfarad connection. I could even see if there's a connection between here and there. And well, that goes way over here. That doesn't really save me any room. So I'm just trying to spread these caps out, and I'm using connections on common negatives where I can. Kind of serves as a double as a terminal strip. Alright, so I've installed the electrolytics. I'll probably put a little silicone glue there to keep those guys apart, just to make sure. I've got my plug going in. I found a polarized plug, and ideally I want the line to be neutralized, mostly for radio interference purposes. Sometimes if you live in an area which has a lot of interference and you have a flat plug that's not polarized, if you turn the plug around, when it's neutralized, you're going to have less interference, I've found anyway. So if you put a polarized plug on, make sure it's wired in to be neutral when it's on. Now keep in mind, when you turn it off, it's going to reverse. So neutralized plugs on floating hot chassis sets, they don't make a whole lot of sense, but if you have to use one, then make sure you have it in the neutral position when the set is on. And the reason that I chose this cord is because it's actually off of an iron that I found in the garbage that someone threw away. So it's high heat rated, high current rated plug, which means that whoever gets this, if they for some reason want to actually use a coffee percolator in the front, they can. They'll have the proper gauge wiring to do so. So, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and plug the set in, and hopefully there won't be any fireworks when I do this. And is the set... I can't see the pilot light from here. Is it on? I think so. I don't know. Maybe I turned it off. No, I didn't turn it off. There's no antenna connected to this thing. Well, I'm not going to pick up a thing without an antenna, so let me see if that makes an improvement. Let me hook something up here. Alright, well, it does kind of work, even though albeit poorly. And it's barely bearable. Barely bearable, is that a word? Barely bearable to be listened to because the speaker in it just is shot to smithereens. Just sounds like a tin can. Good God. Volume pot, the tone, well, the the band switch, everything is so gunked up on this thing. Maybe it was in a kitchen. Maybe it's why the paint was all fucked up on it. Oh yeah, I forgot to measure the chassis to ground here. Usually I just guess here. 50-50 is pretty good chance whether I got it the right time. All right. Well, I might have a problem with the volume pot. I tried it again this time with a different speaker. I mean, it's either screeching loud as can be or nothing. The last thing I'm going to try, I don't think this is the issue. I think the volume pot is out of whack. They've put it underneath this little cardboard box, so I need to pull this pilot light back and pull this tube. And how is this thingy attached? I think I know how. Yep, the volume pot is holding that cardboard box on. Instead of trying to deal with that, I think I'm just going to cut this thing open so I can get down and take a look at the pot, see what's going on. Okay, so there's the pot there. I can see why they put it in a little protective box, because you've got your live switch points right there. So I'll have to enclose it back up again. Luckily I saved all the little pieces. So let me squirt some contact cleaner down in there and see if we can work that in really well. Maybe get some of the volume control function back. I'm just absolutely going to flood it. The idea is if there's any tin whiskers or anything that could possibly be causing debris to make the pot surfaces more resistant, then maybe this will resolve it. I'm going to flush it one more time. Worst comes down to worse, I think we have a bunch of these over at the museum, so if this pot's bad, I can replace it, not a problem. Okay, so let's go ahead and put this tube back in. That guy can go there, and let's plug it back in. Okay, that's on.
Quarterback said he definitely has a chance to play in the upcoming game against Garoppolo suffered a UCL.
All right, well, that did solve the problem. We have gotten volume control back. I feel a little better looking at this. Wouldn't be easy for someone to jam their fingers past that, but I've got to make sure and seal that back up again properly. You know, I thought maybe now it's time to take a break and I could show you guys some of my radio collection. My house is kind of always a weird wreck, but this is some of my collection. I have a tendency to like weird, uncommon to the US European sets. This is French. This is my strange little house radio. That's American, actually. Here's a Siemens. Saba happens to be one of my favorite brands. This with the automatic tuning. And here's a Philips. The stuff on the floor is all stuff I work on for the museum. And that's all museum stuff too. This is my Philips by Ampli. My Saba Freudenstadt, which I believe crudely translated from German means happy city, except in a sinister manner. That's what someone told me. I have a bunch of cathedrals. When I first started, I loved cathedrals. They're not my favorite thing now, but I have a lot of them. And then, by the way, I have a very tolerant wife. She doesn't mind that I clog up the house with radios. This is my favorite stereo system. Unfortunately, has an awful looking cabinet. This is a Drexel cabinet fitted Motorola 3-channel amp stereo with center 15-inch woofer, 5 little speakers on each side, and then additional speakers. These are my 1970s era Bose bookshelf speakers. This is my Zenith robot dial set with a shutter dial, motorized tuning. This is a Pilot radio made out of Long Island City, New York. I have just 1 or 2 Catalan sets. That's my Emerson. That's a Braun. And then my other sets are kind of a mixture of American sets on the top here. Zenith toaster. And then here's some more Sabas, ranging from basically medium to excellent to top of the line at the bottom, all with automatic tuning. This is my French-made Pandoc, if I'm saying that right. Here's another Zenith shutter dial, and I've never seen one in this half-barrel shape. And then this is my, I'm already saying it wrong, Zasta, if anyone's Russian, you can say it. Red Star Soviet-made radio, and this is the radio that was influenced by. This is an Excelsior, SNR Excelsior Model 55. Again, another kind of a machine age RCA. I kind of a soft spot for RCAs for some reason. And then my vintage appliances and some radios in here. So anyway, hope you all had a interesting little nickel tour of my crap. But I think I'm going to call it quits for the day. My brother's coming over here in a few minutes, and we're going to sit around in the nice warm sun. Welcome to day 2 of working on the Hallicrafters, and luckily it's still visible, but the run kind of settled down a little bit. I'm still not happy with that, but I've got kind of a predicament right now. So I've got a little bit of spray paint left, probably just enough to put another coat on this once I sand down the imperfections. But just like everything else now, there is a shortage of spray paint. I went over to the hardware store, 2 hardware stores in fact, where I usually get my paint, and the shelves were cleared except for like maybe white and black and high heat barbecue paint. But it's like I asked the paint guy, and he's like, yeah, there's just like, can't get your hands on spray paint. But anyway, I'll have to make what I've got last, and so I hope that I can successfully sand this down. Again, it's winter here, and so it doesn't get quite as warm during the day, maybe up to the 50s, 60s maybe. And so I'm going to let it sit out in the sun while we have it for the next 3 or 4 days. And then I will sand it. Like, I've had this repeatedly happen in the wintertime where I will have a nice paint job, and then I put the final coat on, and even though it's been a few days, the paint has not hardened, and you have a chemical reaction, and the surface will crinkle, and it's the worst thing ever. So it's worth your effort and patience to simply just let your paint job really cure before you do any sort of sanding or retouch up and respray. All right, well, now that we are back to the chassis, it's time to do the plain old boring recap job. And this set has one of the strangest chassis grounds I've seen. Well, cap 2 ground connections I've seen. This is it. You've basically got this, I'm not sure what they call when they wrap a wire. It's not a coil. I think they call this a gimmick. And it wraps around this .05 rated cap. And in fact, I'm talking to myself, trying to remember exactly how this works. But bottom line, we have, this is chassis ground going through this wire that then goes through this end and through this cap. Okay, so what I tend to do, because I'm trying to remember, I think the one time I cut the coil out, it oscillated like crazy, and so I'm not going to be able to unwrap that coil from this cap. So I'm going to leave the cap in, but snip it out of the circuit. It can still hang there, but we'll just put a safety cap across these two leads here. Other than that, there's not a whole lot to replace. We have these three. They look like they're all rated the same, 0.05 microfarads. The rest of these guys, these are ceramic caps, and they never go bad unless you physically break them or do something horrible to them. There's also a resistor going to ground here, and I'm not good at remembering my resistor codes, but this is not a high enough value, I believe, for getting the proper amount of current lowered to what we want. Now, I will do a recap, and then I'll test it on my test rig here and see if it passes. And if it doesn't, then I'm going to switch out this resistor. Because if you put in a safety cap and there's nothing else going to ground, your set should test well. If there's something else going to ground, like say a resistor or another capacitor, that can throw it off. But anyway, I'm going to carefully replace. I'm going to replace this first and then do a test to make sure it still works before I do the shotgun the rest of the caps. Alright, it's time to do the safety test. I get a feeling it probably won't pass. I've got my test rig up here, and what does it say on this polarity? 0.01, that's very low. Let's reverse the polarity. This is probably on the hot side. Woo! 1.0, 0.9. Yep. See, that resistor is incorrect, so we'll need to change that out to rectify the situation. Okay, so it's a little more complicated than that. I did replace the grounding resistor. That's the bleeder resistor. And then I also detached, there was a shielding ground from two of the RF tubes. And so I snipped this one and snipped that one. The radio stopped working. So I put a cap between the shield and the ground, and now it works. And our set now passes just barely at the threshold. Still works pretty well.
Now we're here, man. I hope we get some good games tonight.
Anyway, so electrically, as far as the radio goes, it's in good shape, and I need to get it off the dinner table because we're getting ready to eat, and probably people don't want to have live electronics sitting there. All right, so this is after about 3 or 4 days sitting in the sun, and what I did is I let the finish harden up a little bit, and I was able to, of course, the stupid washing machine's making a racket now, but anyway, I sanded down the areas that were uneven. I've got a little bit more work to do. There's a little bit of unevenness here. I use a wet sand sponge. I'm actually working on this radio too, which you'll probably see before this episode, but painting in the winter, even when it's in a warmer climate, is more difficult. The paint does just not settle and lay down as evenly. So a lot more sanding, a lot more prep work, a lot more curing, but whatever. If you don't have a nice looking finish, it's not going to be worth it. So spend your time doing a good job on the prep, the sanding, and the finish. All right, well, I've been putting this off for over a week because I'm frankly scared that it's still going to mess up. But I'm going to put the final coat on the blue Hallicrafters, and they are out of basically all the different colors at the hardware store, except they did have clear. So I'm going to coat this with a final coat of clear gloss and hope that the paint doesn't react and lift and crinkle. And which, if it does, means I'm going to have to strip it down, which would really suck. So here goes nothing. All right, let's try this again. This is week 2 of trying to get the case to cure. And we've been having some pretty nice warm weather for the past few days, so I think I'm going to give it a shot. Got a little bit of paint left, and hopefully this time it'll work out. Well, I tell you, I got lucky. I just ran out of paint, and I had just enough to recoat this guy, and there's no wrinkling of the finish. Thank God. It's taken me 2 or 3 weeks to let this cure up enough to put another job on it. Got one other over here. I think I might even try to do it today as well. We'll see. Well, I must say, this came out gorgeous. I think it was worth the effort. This is one of the best paint jobs I've done in a long time. It looks like it's factory sprayed. And now that I've succeeded in finally getting the cabinet squared away, I'm going to polish up the plastic bits and pieces, the knobs that go with this piece, and I'm going to use my favorite all-time product, which is Novus number 2. I buy it in the big jug like this. It's much cheaper than buying the little bottles. And just use like an old rag, or in this case a sock, and you just use this. The reason I'm doing this right now, this is actually a project you'll see before this project is done. But I spilt plastic polish all over the place. So I want to use this crap up all over the escutcheon here. So the escutcheon and the knobs, hopefully I haven't lost them because it's been weeks. Yeah, here's the knobs. Polish these guys up too. And yay, I think maybe not tomorrow, but the day after next I'll be able to reassemble this guy. Alright, well now that we've got the case of the radio looking pretty good now, I'm going to do the last thing to the chassis, which is add an audio input feature. And that involves running an audio signal through the volume pot, which is up here, buried up in there. And I'm looking at the cabling coming out of it, and we got this shielded cable, and I believe it has our top and the bottom of the pot. We've got a black wire, which is going through a capacitor to the same ground as the electrolytic, so that's by default our bottom of the pot. And the other one is going through a cap that's going to our first IF transformer right here. So we're going to run the audio through this thingy here. You can refer to it as an isolation transformer. You can also look at it the same way as a wall wart works. You have 120 volts coming in and 12 volts coming out. We're going to run our signal to the top of the pot through the primary, which is the 120 volt side, and then the incoming audio comes in through this side, which is the secondary winding. And that will reduce basically any sort of it'll reduce any potential for current ever getting through the user through that 3.5 millimeter jack that we're going to install. So I'm going to go ahead and wire it in, and hopefully I'm correct about these being the correct leads. Otherwise we could have catastrophic results, but that's always exciting when we do these shows. You never know what's going to happen. Okay, this is final day of working on the Hallicrafters radio, and I have to admit something that I did yesterday that was really, really stupid. I was testing the audio input feature I've added here, which is this isolation transformer going to the either side of the volume pot here. And the radio itself on radio was squealing like a banshee. And maybe it's because I was late in the day and I'd had a few beers or whatever. But anyway, long story short, I had put the 12S K7 tube in the 12S A7 socket and vice versa. So, long story short, I wasted an entire hour trying to figure out a stupid mistake that I had made. So now that I've tested everything out here, we're working pretty well now. I've got my Bluetooth thingy-bob hooked up. And so let's go ahead and fire up the set. There we go. Right now I've got a little switch wire coming out the back. I'll put a switch here when I put it back in the cabinet. That'll be for the radio signal to be reattached if the user wants to. Anyway, Seems like it's working pretty well. There's only a few things left to do on the cabinet. There's a grill cloth that goes underneath here to keep dust from collecting on the speaker. And also need to put the discussion back in. I polished this yesterday. It was pretty scratched up, but I got most of the scratches off, and then I cleaned all the knobs. And so we're just about ready to do a final reassembly. I never knew if this thing was ever going to get done. Again, because the paint was so difficult because this time of year. I'm actually pleased because I have more than one good paint job. The other paint job I did that turned out good in the end is this guy. You'll see this in probably the episode after this one, but it's all coming together. Again, like painting in the wintertime is difficult. I can imagine if you live in an area that actually gets cold versus here where it just kind of gets a little cold, it's even more difficult. All right, I'm happy to say it's all back together again. This was definitely one of the more challenging sets I've worked on in more ways than one. Electrically, cosmetically, but it all came together in the end. And what I did for the switch, because it doesn't have a back, and I didn't want to drill a hole in the case, is the IF-RF switch is in the back here. That turns the RF signal on and off so that we can run Bluetooth or audio in, as I'm doing now.
If he says you look fetching and want to show you his etchings, don't go up there. I'm telling you, don't you go up there. If he says you look good in a sweater, go home and write him a letter. If he buys you quotes of champagne, take a train and go to Maine. Get out of town before it's too late. If he says, darling, you look just...
Anyway, I think it turned out pretty well. You know, it's too bad that I'm not really good at doing screen transfers, because it sure would have looked nice to have that Hallicrafters logo down there. But, you know, unfortunately, the original paint was too far gone. So I'm going to let this run here for a few more hours just to make sure everything's going to settle in, burn in, and all that, and not mess up. But otherwise, I think it's good to go. Anyhow, thanks so much for watching as always. I sure had a lot of fun working on this guy, and I hope that you guys had fun watching. If you have any comments or questions, you can leave them down below in the comments section. And if you like what you see on this channel, press that like button. Until the next time a radio comes across my workbench, I'll see you guys next time. Adios.